Accenture has the largest media mix modeling practice in the world. So we track on a global basis about $28 to $30 billion in media spend across Europe, Asia, and the United States. And here in the United States, we have about $18 to $20 billion worth of media that we track. And the good news about a media mix modeling practice is that you don't just get all the media money, you also get reported by the clients the sales that were driven by that media, as well as brand awareness statistics and all the things that they use to measure the effectiveness of advertising. So because we have such a big practice in that area across so many different types of clients, we can bring a lot of insight when it comes to trying to do these big syndicated studies about the effectiveness of media. And so that's the role we had with the Disney ABC project. Was we brought the data, we brought some of the expertise from a modeling standpoint about how advertisers approach these types of problems, and married up with the knowledge of what Disney was trying to accomplish. It was a good project.
So how does attribution come into it? You're talking about modeling, mix modeling. Did this project also cover attribution?
Yeah, it does, and that's one of the key aspects of media mix modeling or econometrics, is that it almost implicitly does do attribution, because it looks at both, well, here's how I can measure the effectiveness of an immediate channel, but I can also measure the marginal or incremental or attributed aspect of a media channel. You can look at everything simultaneously and see, well, I want to see how they work together. And there's usually a very big difference between what I would call the attributed value of a media channel, what is absolutely measured. If I just look at the value of paid search, I'm going to get a very strong ROI. But when I see that paid search would be nowhere near as effective if it wasn't married up with multi-platform TV, for example, from an attribution standpoint, it gives me a very different view about, well, how should I budget for those together? How an advertiser should think about using them together so that I can actually maximize my overall media budget, not just my single channel media budget.
So is last click attribution still a practice or an issue? Does it play into? Please explain that briefly, if you could.
Well, if you're saying, I don't know if I can explain why it continues to happen, other than just a lot of advertisers, a lot of marketers, it's one of two things. When they lack the sophistication within their organizations to know another way, or they have the sophistication, but they say other models are so complex, it's hard for me to explain it to my organization, so it's not worth the complexity. I think that's changing. I think that would have been a very de rigueur answer 5 years ago for 80-90% of marketers. I think today it's more like 20, 25, 30%, and they tend to be moving down towards the mid-market and the small market. Big companies get this stuff now. It's becoming much less common that people use last click attribution, but it still exists.
So Accenture brought some $12 billion worth of spend to the table. Where does that data come from?
It comes from clients. So the advertisers themselves, we're commissioned by the advertisers themselves to look at helping them do a better job of maximizing the yield they get off their media budget. And what we did in the case of ABC is they said, well, we have 20 of these accounts. Let's roll them all together into a big pool of money and look at them at vertical levels, at category levels, as well as in whole, to see if we can make some generalized observations about, is the market working correctly? Are there situations where they're kind of systematically not thinking about the science and the more sophisticated ways of looking at the yield they're getting off their media budgets? And can we use this as an opportunity to give them some education and hopefully get better return?
If you could mention one or two of the more interesting things that you found in this ABC Disney project, what would those be? Yeah,
I'd say a couple of things. One is that there was this concept that we looked at, which was how the media channels work together. We called it the halo effect. And one thing we found was that digital is largely saturated. Now, I'm very precise in the way I say that. There's lots more inventory that advertisers could go buy when it comes to buying other digital ads, but their ability to actually drive more sales is largely gated right now. We found within the study that the only way that an advertiser right now can really get more yield out of Google, out of Facebook, out of some of these big platforms, is by combining investments in those channels with investment in multi-platform TV, because multi-platform TV popped out of the study as being by far the most powerful way to create a lot more top of the funnel demand that would ultimately then trickle down and make digital media more effective. I'd say the other thing that was very interesting in this study was that we found that we did a normalization at one point where we said, well, we know TV, there's an impression in the market that TV is more expensive, multi-platform TV is more expensive, and it is. If you look at its cost for a GRP for 1,000 impressions versus digital, it's more expensive. But then when we compared that to its ability to drive sales, it looks relatively cheap, to the tune of almost like 35–40%. There's almost if you just compare it to like Google, its average price per 1,000 impressions is almost twice on a per unit basis, but it's delivering almost 3 times the sales efficacy. So again, you can make the argument that it's 33–40% undervalued from that perspective. And that was actually a very surprising finding. I think you knew that because advertisers aren't using a lot of the most sophisticated ways to understand yield, and they don't always do as good a job as they could when it comes to doing more comprehensive and sophisticated analytics, that you'd see some discontinuities. But it popped out of the study in a rather robust way that there's some actually big continuities that have a material impact on the ability of an advertiser to drive return.
Last question, how did you correlate results with ad exposure or media exposure?
We put everything into a big model, and this is essentially what the econometrics process does. Accenture has a product that, I won't bore you with the long technical name of it, but it's essentially a statistical methodology that works a lot like a regression. You know, we look at variation in how people have spent their money. We look at actual spend, and then we see, well, did the sales change? And then we just attribute the two back. We say, well, the sales change, when attributed back to the changes in each of the media, each of the media channels, we can draw inference from that, we can draw elasticities from that and make sense of, well, where's the most opportunity? Where are we wasting our money? Where do we have additional headroom? And if we were to allocate the money in a different way, what would we have gotten? So it was essentially a relatively straightforward and well-proven statistical methodology that we applied.